Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to the Proclamation 2021 Publisher Orientation webinar. My name is Sarah Ramirez. I serve as the Review and Adoption Coordinator in the Instruction Materials Division here at TEA. So the purpose of today's webinar is to provide publishers with information about the expectations and requirements of the proclamation that ultimately will help them decide if they want to participate and submit materials for Proclamation 2021. We will also be providing specific next steps in the review and adoption process. We do have a full agenda today, so I definitely encourage you to take notes and submit questions through the GoToWebinar application. We will try our best to answer all of them during the webinar. After the webinar, we'll be posting the recording, but we will also be posting the questions we receive and answers provided all to the publisher portal. If you're not familiar with the publisher portal, you can access it from the Instruction Materials webpage. Before we review the agenda, we want to get to know our audience. So what is your current role here today? If you work for a publishing company, what is your primary responsibility? Or maybe you're here from a district. We want to know that as well. If none of these options apply, you can definitely select other, and you can explain more in the questions field. Let's go ahead and see our results. Okay, so it looks like we have a mix of publishers here today, a lot of different responsibilities and a few districts, so that's good. We'll be going over all the requirements for a content developer and of course the bids and contract staff of publishing companies. So thank you for participating in that poll. Let's go ahead and review our agenda. So Kelly Calloway, the Senior Director of Instructional Materials, will be discussing how publishers can participate in Proclamation 2021. Jackie Porter, Director of Early Childhood Education, will be discussing the Prekindergarten guidelines. Amy Williams, the Director of Review and Adoption in the Instruction Materials Division, will be talking about the breakouts for the Prekindergarten guidelines. Janet Warren, the Director of Distribution and Accessibility in the Instruction Materials Division, will be reviewing the accessibility requirements within the proclamation. Melissa Lautenschlager, the Director of Quality Instructional Materials in the Special Projects Division, will be providing additional information about the Texas Resource Review. Amy will be back to talk about the specific deadlines and requirements of the proclamation and provide additional resources to help publishers navigate the process. Kelly will then offer some final thoughts and answer questions if time allows. We have one more question for our audience. If you are a publishing company here today, what is the most recent proclamation you participated in? Or perhaps you haven't participated in a recent proclamation in a while. That's okay, you can select none of the above. Let's go ahead and see our results. Okay, so it looks like we have a lot of returning publishers, which is great, but we do have some publishing companies that have not been with us in a while. That's okay. We will be going over all these requirements for Proclamation 2021. Thank you for participating. Before we pass things off to Kelly, I do want to let you know that we're monitoring questions we receive through the webinar, and please get those submitted to us. We'll be answering them as time allows. The webinar is being recorded and will be posted to the publisher portal along with all of our slides and a complete audience and question and answer document. Let's pass things off to Kelly.
Okay, hi, and welcome. So let me make a few general comments about Proclamation 2021 before I dive into the more specific information that I have to present to you. Usually at this time of a proclamation cycle, when we have this second webinar, we have all the answers, or at least we think we do. There are always new questions that we discover we don't have answers to. Right now, today, regarding Proclamation 2021, we know for certain that we do not have all the answers. Pre-kindergarten systems are just different from K-12 instructional materials. And so we're all trying to learn about pre-kindergarten systems. Luckily, we have the person we think is the world's greatest expert on pre-K, Jackie Porter, to help us with that. But unfortunately, we don't have the ability to do a Vulcan mind meld. And so this is really going to be a learning process for us, and we ask that we have your patience as we do learn. There are several things in the works that we won't have final answers for you about today, including how do you cover pre-kindergarten standards in student materials when pre-kindergarten students, for the large part, can't read yet. What kind of accessibility requirements are required for pre-K systems? And so we're going to present you with the kind of standard information about the stuff, and we're going to continually update you as further decisions are made by the State Board of Education. Amy's going to mention this a little bit later, but I want to go ahead and say it now as well. Make sure you're tuned in to the November board meeting because they will be making some decisions that are specific to Proclamation 2021. And we're consulting, as I said, with Jackie to learn more about early childhood education. We're also bringing in some experts from outside the agency regarding early childhood education and accessibility related issues. And so keep that in mind when Janet is presenting to you. Just sort of a heads up that this is really a work in progress for us. We're going to start off with some vocabulary that you need to have in your package. Acronyms and initialisms are a little boring, but I'm going to go through them anyway because you need to know what we're talking about when we use these acronyms and initialisms. You need to understand that AIM means accessible instructional materials. EOY is a term used in the Texas Pre-Kindergarten Standards Guidelines, which Jackie will go over in detail in a little bit, and that stands for end of year. Education Service Centers are abbreviated as ESCs. EMAT, I noticed that we have several new publishers in Sarah's second poll. And so you will need to learn how to use EMAT. That's not an acronym or an initialism. It's just a nickname, if you will, but it is TEA's online ordering system for instructional materials. And you will need to, if you decide to participate in the proclamation process, you'll need to gain access to EMAT. We frequently abbreviate instructional materials as IM. NIMAC is a very important place that Janet will give you more information about, as well as NIMA, the standard for creating accessible instructional materials. SBOE, we sometimes forget that people who are new to this process don't know that refers to the State Board of Education. The statement of intent to bid is one of the most important things that Amy will talk to you about a little bit more in her second presentation. Yes, I believe that's her second presentation. And so you need to make sure you pay close attention to that. The State Review Panel, the SRP, is the group of teachers and experts who will eventually, if you decide to participate in the process, review your product for coverage of those pre-kindergarten standards. The TAC is the Texas Administrative Code, and the TEC is the Texas Education Code. The Texas Education Code, those are the laws that are enacted by the Texas legislature under which we operate, and the Texas Administrative Code is the code that provides additional clarity and guidance regarding those laws. TPG, Texas Pre-Kindergarten Guidelines, which Jackie will be talking to you about. TRR, Texas Resource Review, which Melissa will be talking to you about in just a little bit, and WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Standards, which Janet will be talking to you about. So all of these acronyms are used in the upcoming sets of slides, so this might be a handy reference for you. Let's talk a little bit, especially for those of you who are new to participating in the Texas process, about funding of instructional materials. Instructional materials are funded through the Technology and Instructional Materials Fund, which is provided to us in that huge billion-something dollar amount for this upcoming biennium. Out of that fund, we're required to set aside some funds for various projects that are also authorized by the legislature, or for various kind of more unique school situations like JJAEPs, and also so that we have a little bit in reserve for very unexpected and rapid high enrollment growth. And so once we set aside the amounts we have to set aside, we were left this biennium with $187.09 per student. That is for the biennium. It must last districts the entire biennium. The state board does take that amount into consideration when issuing proclamations and tries to create a proclamation, a review and adoption cycle that isn't going to be impossible for districts to meet based on that allotment. The review and adoption cycle is available on our website, and that's certainly something we can point you to if you have any trouble finding it. In addition to that initial allotment, districts get $20.16 for each bilingual student to help them out with those materials. There are specific things that districts can and cannot spend their allotments on. So I'm not going to read these to you because I know that would be, you know, incredibly boring. But the thing that they mostly spend their allotments on are instructional materials, and that's any kind of instructional materials. And this is important for you to know, including both adopted and non-adopted instructional materials. Districts are not required in the state of Texas to choose adopted instructional materials. There are benefits to choosing adopted instructional materials. Those benefits include the fact that we provide those materials in accessible formats for students with disabilities, free of charge to districts. Also the fact that those materials can be ordered quickly and easily through EMAT. Raise your hand if you remember what EMAT is. Also the benefit that those adopted instructional materials come with 8-year contracts. So districts know that they're buying materials at a price that is not going to go up during the course of the next 8 years. Let's talk a little bit about review and adoption of instructional materials. For those of you who are just truly brand new to this process, the State Board of Education calls for instructional materials for a specific subject or grade level through a proclamation. And Proclamation 2021, and I'm seeing an error on my slide that should be italicized, so I apologize for that. But Proclamation 2021, of course, as you know, or you wouldn't be here today, calls for pre-kindergarten system. There are some things about Proclamation 2021 that are unique from other proclamations. So this is really information for those of you who have participated in other proclamation cycles, just to kind of keep these things in mind. These materials are required to correlate to the Texas Prekindergarten guidelines instead of TEEP. There are 10 domains in the Texas Prekindergarten guidelines. So that makes the proclamation a little more complicated because there's not just one set of teeth. And I feel certain that Jackie will talk about those 10 domains, and I know that Amy will talk about coverage within those 10 domains. But the coverage must include at least 50% in each domain so that we don't end up adopting materials that are heavy in a few of the domains, but totally miss the boat in other domains. The other big difference about Proclamation 2021 is that for the past several years, we have required electronic samples of instructional materials for pre-adoption review. And that's been an important focus of the board because they want their process to be as transparent to the public as possible. They want the public to have easy access to all materials, but that's really not possible with pre-kindergarten systems because so many of the student materials are things like manipulative. I always use the term teddy bears. I'm not saying that you have to have teddy bears in your pre-kindergarten kits, but you know, there are things that can't be provided online. And so you, if you participate in this process, will be required to provide us with actual physical samples prior to the review that are as close as possible to your final products that will go into school districts. And then after the review and the adoption, if your product is adopted, you will be required to provide us with new physical samples of those products if they have changed in any way. Products are adoptable. Again, this is kind of information for those of you who are brand new to our process. If they cover at least 50% of the Texas Prekindergarten guidelines, I already mentioned the fact that that has to be 50% within each domain. They do have to be free from factual errors, and factual errors includes anything that might hinder student learning. So it includes significant grammar and punctuation errors in addition to factual errors like 2 + 2 = 5. They must be determined to be suitable for the subject and grade level. And of course, they must be reviewed by academic experts. That's by academic experts. That's what our state review panels do, and they will be doing that for Proclamation 2021 in the summer of 2020. In addition to those bulleted items, there's all kinds of additional information that you really need to know. So we're not going to go through all this because it would bore you to tears, but if you're going to participate in this proclamation, you really need to read these sections of the Texas Administrative Code. That code can be found on our website. We can also send you specific links to these particular sections if you feel like you need us to do that. But it's really important that you actually sit down and take time to read these rules. And so that's my kind of big picture general overview. Everybody else during the course of this webinar will provide you with a lot of way more specific details, but I'm going to pause right now and strongly encourage you to submit questions through the webinar questions option that Sarah mentioned before. And as she also mentioned, we will try to answer those questions as time allows during the course of the webinar. And of course, not only as time allows, but assuming that we actually know the answer to the questions that you're asking. But we're really hoping for some questions we don't know the answer to as well, because we know that there's a whole lot we need to learn about everything involved with Proclamation 2021.
Thank you so much, Kelly. I haven't really seen a lot of questions come through, but I'm assuming that means everybody is just absorbing the information and really taking it to heart. So that's really great. We are recording the webinar. We will be posting the slides and the complete audience question and answer document at the conclusion. Let's keep things moving and go and pass it off to Jackie.
All right. Good afternoon. My name is Jackie Porter, and I'm the statewide director of early childhood for TEA, and I am going to give you an overview this afternoon of the Texas Prekindergarten guidelines. So very excited to be here today. The Texas Pre-K guidelines were revised in 2015, and they were implemented in the 2016-2017 school year. The revised guidelines provide a means to align pre-K programs with the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills. They are sequenced to follow child development and give teaching strategies for each of the guidelines. So we'll look at some of the examples later. If you don't have a copy of the pre-K guidelines, there is a link on the screen so that you can download them from the TEA website. The Texas pre-K guidelines are based on current knowledge of theory and scientific research about how children develop and learn. The guidelines are intended to be useful to a broad audience, including school districts, Head Start programs, child care providers, and most importantly, children's families. The guidelines describe an average 4-year-old child entering pre-K. It is well understood that due to age differences and previous experiences, not all children will show up at this level of development. The guidelines are designed as a resource to help teachers make informed decisions about the curriculum content and implement a comprehensive curriculum. So let's start with organization. Let's take a look at how the pre-K guidelines are organized. The guidelines are a 137-page document that's organized in sections. At the beginning of the document, there's an introduction, a section on using the Texas pre-K guidelines in the classroom, and a section on linking the pre-K guidelines to school readiness. Next are the skill domains, which make up the majority of the document, and last are the appendices. Now we'll go through the first main section of the introduction, which is using the Texas Prekindergarten guidelines in the classroom. The first subsection under the main section of using the pre-K guidelines in the classroom is how the Texas pre-K guidelines support instruction for English learners. This section includes instructional recommendations, background information on bilingual programs, research, and best practices for young English learners. The next section is how the pre-K guidelines support instruction for children with special needs. This section includes information on inclusion, research, and best practices for serving children with special needs, as well as recommendations for ensuring a child can meaningfully participate in school. Guidance is included for teachers on planning and preparing to successfully include a child with special needs in the classroom. Next is the learning environment. In this section, recommendations are given for the arrangement of the space in a pre-K classroom, such as traffic patterns and organization, placement of centers, storage of materials, etc. Information on using the physical space to promote language and literacy is included. Examples and suggestions are given on the organization and routine of activities, including classroom management. Guidance around classroom activities such as large group, small group, and learning centers is provided within this section. Sample schedules are included as well as suggestions for outdoor time and meal time. So the next main section of the introduction is linking the Texas pre-K guidelines to school readiness. So we'll take a look at what's included in this section. The first section is monitoring children's learning and development. This section includes information about informal and formal assessments, as well as recommendations for assessing young children. Next is developmental approach to promoting school readiness. This section includes information on child development, how teachers should individualize instruction to facilitate children's developmental progress, and recommendations for integrating concepts across contexts and across different parts of the day. In this section, effective practices for promoting school readiness, topics that are covered are responsive interactions, planning effectively, balance of teaching strategies, which includes direct and indirect instruction, and guidance on how to incorporate flexible groupings in pre-kindergarten. The last section under school readiness is professional development, the key to high-quality pre-K programs. This section includes information on effective professional development practices for pre-K teachers, as well as what should be included in professional development for teachers. The next main section of the pre-K guidelines are the skill domains. The pre-K guidelines are organized into 10 domains, and each domain has their own section. Each domain includes skill areas. 6 domains include the 4 columns you see here. The first column, by around 48 months of age, is what 3-year-old pre-K programs typically use as their outcomes. The second column, end of pre-kindergarten year outcomes, are the outcomes that are expected at the end of the pre-K year for 4-year-old children. The third column gives examples of child behaviors. They are detailed descriptions of expected behaviors across multiple skill domains that should be observed in 4 to 5-year-old children from the beginning to the end of their pre-K experience. And the fourth column gives examples of instructional strategies. This portion of the guidelines provides strategies that teachers can implement to support child outcomes. 4 domains do not actually include the column by around 48 months of age, as there is no research to guide the inclusion of this category in those 4 areas. And so those 4 domains are science, social studies, fine arts, and technology. Outcomes are numbered with a Roman numeral, followed by a letter, and then a number. In the example here, the outcome is 3A1. The Roman numeral indicates the domain. The alphabetic indicator refers to the skill area within the domain, and the number indicates the outcome. The outcomes are numbered sequentially within each skill area. So in the example shown, the outcome is from domain 3, which is emergent literacy reading. It is skill A, which is motivation to read, and it is the first outcome in that skill area. You will notice that each domain begins with an introduction. The introduction provides information about the domain, including an overview, best practices, and reasons why the domain is important for young children. Each domain is then organized into skill areas. Each skill area also includes an introduction paragraph of that particular skill, which may include a definition of the skill or just a general overview. The goal for children who are Ls, as with all children in pre-K, is to provide language and literacy-rich environments that foster mastery of all of the Texas pre-K guidelines. So embedded within the guidelines are instructional techniques and child behaviors that are specific to Ls. The sections are indicated by this icon and are meant to provide further guidance when working with Ls during instruction in English. It should be noted, however, that the Texas pre-K guidelines are meant for all pre-K children, regardless of the child's home language. The additional instructional strategies and child behaviors indicated by the icon are supplements to the Texas pre-K guidelines. Okay, I've been talking for a while. Let's summarize. To summarize the Texas Pre-K guidelines, they are aligned with the TEEPs, they follow child development, they include information on best practices in the introduction. The guidelines are organized by domains. Remember, there are 10 domains. Each domain includes skill areas, and then the outcomes are numbered sequentially in each area. There are 4 columns of information for each outcome. However, 4 domains don't have the by the around 48 months column. All the domains and skill areas have an introductory paragraph with important background information. The guidelines include instructional techniques specific to ELS that are indicated by the book icon. So to recap, there are 10 domains in the Pre-K guidelines. The number you see here on the slide next to each domain is the total number of outcomes that are within each domain. The link to the Texas Pre-K guidelines is again included in the bottom of this slide. So once again, I'm going to encourage you, if you have questions, please submit them to the GoToWebinar questions box so that we can answer them during the webinar or right after.
Thank you so much, Jackie. A lot of great information about the pre-kindergarten guidelines. Amy is next up to talk about the breakouts for the pre-kindergarten guidelines.
Thanks, Sarah, and thank you to all of you for being here. Now that you're all experts on the pre-K guidelines, I'm going to talk to you about the breakouts. So the breakouts are created by dissecting the language in each of those end-of-year outcomes into component parts using very specific rules. The breakouts are used to determine which outcomes are adequately covered in the instructional materials that you submit. But as Kelly mentioned, for an outcome to be considered addressed, each of the associated breakouts must be addressed. Your product's TPG percentage will be calculated separately for each of the 10 domains, and at least 50% of each domain must be covered for the product to be eligible for adoption. To give you a better idea of what that looks like, I've added the information that Jackie presented regarding the number of outcomes in each domain. I've added to that information by also including the number of outcomes that must be met in each domain to achieve at least 50%. And you'll see, because some of those numbers of outcomes are uneven, the minimum will actually be a little higher than 50% for some of those domains. The way that the rule is currently written, you're required to address each breakout twice in student materials and twice in the teacher materials. But as Kelly mentioned, there is some change to the rule being considered, and that will be finalized at the November board meeting. And those changes do take into account the fact that pre-kindergarten materials are unique, and so we're definitely anticipating some changes and just don't have answers yet. I mentioned earlier that breakouts are created using specific rules. When an outcome includes the word "and," everything in the outcome must be included as a separate breakout. And the same is true if the outcome includes the word "including." If it includes the word "or," it won't be separated into different breakouts, and publishers must include at least one of the things in the list separated with "or." For example, if the breakout said the student identifies cats, dogs, or birds, the instructional materials must include at least one of those animals, but not all. If an outcome includes a list following the words "such as," the list after "such as" won't be included in the breakout because those are just examples. But now we're going to look at some real examples from the guidelines. In this example, the outcome includes two "and" statements. Child shows self-awareness and can express pride and age-appropriate abilities and skills. Since everything in an "and" statement must be included as a separate breakout, there are 3 breakouts. Child shows self-awareness, child can express pride in age-appropriate abilities, and child can express pride and age-appropriate skills. Each of those breakouts must be included in the instructional materials in order for the outcome to be considered addressed. In this example, the outcome has an including statement. Child participates in classroom music activities, including singing, playing musical instruments, and moving to rhythms. Everything in an including statement must be a separate breakout. So we see child participates in classroom music activities, including singing, including playing musical instruments, and including moving to rhythms. Each of these breakouts must be included in the instructional materials in order for the outcome to be considered addressed. This example includes two or statements. The child creates or recreates stories, moods, or experiences through dramatic representations. When an outcome includes an or statement, the instructional materials must include at least one, but not all of the things in the list. You will notice that the breakout is an exact duplicate of the outcome. In order for the outcome to be addressed, the instructional materials must teach the child how to create or recreate stories or moods or experiences through dramatic representations. It's completely acceptable to teach the child how to do all or one of these things in the instructional materials. The final example includes a such as statement. Child demonstrates use of location words such as over, under, above, on, beside, next to, between, in front of, near, far, etc. When you see a such as statement in an outcome, it's just an example, it's not a requirement. You'll notice that the such as statement has been completely removed from the breakout. In order for this outcome to be addressed, the instructional materials must include location words. The breakout documents are available on our website in English and Spanish, and since you must cover each of the domains, 50% of the outcomes, we've created separate breakouts for each domain. If you haven't already done so, you should look at the breakouts to make sure you have content in your instructional materials that addresses at least 50% of the outcomes in each of the domains. After the Chapter 66 rules are finalized, we will create the correlation instruments. You'll use the correlation instruments to document where in your instructional materials each of the outcomes are covered. I'm sure you guys have lots of questions about breakouts, so please keep entering those into the question box. And at the end of our presentation, we will answer as many of those as time allows.
Thank you so much, Amy. Great information about the breakouts. As she mentioned, you can find them on the Breakout Documents webpage in English and in Spanish. Thank you to our audience for sticking with us this afternoon. The webinar is being recorded and will be posted to the publisher portal along with all of our slides and the question and answer documents. Let's pass things off to Janet now.
Good afternoon. I'll be discussing accessibility requirements. Okay, all instructional materials must be accessible to students with disabilities in order to be eligible for adoption. People with disabilities frequently experience barriers to the use of printed materials, digital materials, and technologies. Examples where barriers might occur include textbooks, digital documents, websites, apps, learning delivery systems, and electronic devices. Ideally, these are designed from the start for a wide range of users with diverse abilities and disabilities. Unfortunately, that is not always the case. Accessibility is making instructional materials usable by as many people as possible that will treat everyone the same and give everyone the same opportunities. Accessible instructional materials are designed or enhanced in a way that makes them usable across the widest range of learner variability regardless of the format. I will talk about two types of accessible materials. The first is print materials. The TEA contracts with a third party to convert adopted print materials into Braille, large print, audio, and digital text for those students with print disabilities who need one or more of the formats. Publishers of adopted print materials must provide NIMAS files of their programs to facilitate the production of specialized formats. These files are the technical standards used to produce the file from which the accessible, student-ready, alternate format versions of instructional materials can be created and distributed to students with print disabilities. The U.S. Congress adopted NIMAS requirements as part of IDEA in 2004. What to know about NIMAS files? NIMAS files are XML-based source files created by publishers or other content producers to be used to create accessible specialized formats. The full set of files include XML content files, a package file, images, a PDF of the title page, or whichever page contains the ISBN and copyright information. NIMAS files can help to facilitate timely access to alternate formats of instructional materials for students with visual impairments or other print disabilities. You may have to provide two versions of the NIMAS files. You'll be required to provide NIMAS files for your pre-adopted student materials and teacher materials intended for student use, such as Blackline Masters. If you have corrections to the materials, then you'll also have to provide corrected or final files. There may be a cost associated with the creation of NIMAS files. The NIMAC is going to be one of your best resources to find out about NIMAS files. They can help you set up an account and help you set up the metadata. You can visit the publishers pages at the NIMAC for more information. The National Association of Accessible Educational Materials, which we call the AIM Center, has information on their website about NIMAS files. The AIM Center and the NIMAC will provide the best resources to create the NIMAS files for those of you that have not done this before. The second type of instructional materials that need to be accessible are electronic materials. In the same way that it's not right to exclude someone from a physical building because they are in a wheelchair, it's also not right to exclude someone from a website because they have a visual impairment or they may have a physical disability that prevents them from using a mouse. Accessibility is part of the law, but it's also the right thing to do. Publishers that have electronic instructional materials adopted by the State Board of Education must contract with a reputable third party to provide a report for each electronic component. This report must verify that the components allow the technical standards, that the components follow the technical standards required by the Federal Rehabilitation Act, Section 508, and WCAG 2.0 AA standards. You can find additional information about this requirement on pages 14 and 15 of the proclamation. Materials that are created from the start to be presented on a digital platform are considered to be born digital. But just because something is digital doesn't mean that it is accessible. Accessibility is the ability of users with disabilities to effectively use websites, mobile, and web-based applications, software, and hardware. The systems need to be designed so that they interact appropriately with assistive technology. Some examples of assistive technologies are screen readers, braille keypads, and screen magnification for someone that is low vision or is blind. Voice recognition software so that people that can only use their voice can navigate through websites. And then also head pointers and switch devices that allow someone with limited movement to navigate without using their hands or a traditional mouse. There's a new imperative for publishers to create content that is not only born digital, but is also born accessible. When you start to think about your digital content, consider ways to make that content accessible to everyone. Visit the AIM Center website at aem.cast.org to learn about best practices for publishers and software developers. Also, the Center on Technology and Disability has a 2-page flyer that they've created called Born Accessible Quick Guide, which explains born digital and born accessible. There are some places that you can find free webinars. One is from the Great Lakes and Pacific ADA Centers. They have one called Accessibility 101, an ingredient in the recipe, not an addition for afterwards. Because it is much easier to make a product born accessible than to try to retrofit accessibility. Also, there's a company called Level Access, which provides free webinars quite frequently. So if you need to contact us, you can submit a help desk ticket through the Instructional Materials Help Desk, or you can call or email me or Leanne Lee. Leanne Lee is an accessibility specialist here in the Instructional Materials Division. And we would like you to keep submitting those questions in the webinar questions section.
Thank you so much, Janet. A lot of helpful information. As we've been saying again, please submit those questions to the through the application. We look forward to hearing from you there. We will keep moving things along with Melissa to talk about the Texas Resource Review.
Thank you. This is Melissa Lautenschlager, and I'm the Director of Instructional Materials Quality over the Texas Resource Review project. And so I'd like to talk a little bit about what the Texas Resource Review is and how it's involved with evaluating instructional materials for quality. In 2017, legislation was passed directing TEA to create and maintain a web portal to assist LEAs in selecting materials. As part of the evaluation, TEA facilitates an independent review of instructional materials for quality to ensure that districts have vital information needed to make purchasing decisions. This process works alongside with the already established SBOE, TEACS, and TPG coverage process, and it is intended to enhance the process to provide an additional quality information about products. So I want to go over just a few components so you understand the process, and then I'll talk a little bit more about how to get involved. We start the Texas Resource Review process by developing Texas-specific quality rubrics that are designed for Texas standards. All materials still maintain going through the state review process that everyone has been talking to you about, but then they are can also be submitted for quality. Once we have a rubric designed and established and we're preparing for reviews, we recruit, select, and train a diverse team of Texas educators, which includes teachers, administrators, and leaders across the state representing many different types of rural, suburban, urban areas, as well as representation for differentiated groups, including EL and SPED. Once we have our reviewers, we train them in being able to evaluate materials using the rubrics. They spend anywhere from 12 to 18 weeks reviewing the instructional materials for quality, collecting evidence, and on a weekly basis coming to a consensus meeting regarding the quality and types of evidence collected. Once reviews are complete, they are sent to ESC staff in order to validate the reviews to ensure reports include evidence that support any of the quality ratings. The reports are also sent to publishers, allowing publishers to review reports before publication in order to comment, identify errors, and request short revisions. Once that is done, the review teams reevaluate the responses from publishers to determine if a change in evaluation is due or if revisions require a change. Then product reviews are finalized, resent to publishers, and then published finally on our website. How materials are submitted for quality reviews in the Texas Resource Review. Publishers may voluntarily submit materials. The SBOE can request that materials be reviewed for quality. as well as we can have 10% of districts request a set of materials be reviewed for quality. Being that we are a new process, we have taken a lot of opportunity to engage publishers in feedback in order to improve our process and begin to partner in the work to support publishers in understanding the process, contributing, and making a more clear and transparent pathway for quality reviews. The way that we've engaged is we, in the beginning, began to publish rubrics for public comment, in which publishers were able to respond and share their feedback on rubrics. We developed a 3-8 ELAR pilot in which we had 7 publishers participate, providing feedback on the process, publisher applications, and the design of the web portal as well, and how the reports would be displayed. We then conducted publisher webinars in order to talk through more changes to the process and gather additional feedback, and made many individual calls to publishers, specifically those associated with ELAR, in order to gather feedback and improve our process. As a result of this feedback, we made many changes to the review process, and right now I want to walk you through those process changes. The first is associated with phases of the rubric development. We draft rubrics within TEA and then hold working group sessions to obtain feedback before we revise, and then we send out for public comment. Right now, the pre-K quality rubric is in this first draft and will be shortly published for public comment, in which there is a 30-day period for publishers and other public entities to be able to share their feedback. Once the public comment period closes, we revise rubrics based on feedback and publish a final rubric. The final rubric is then posted and finalized and stays static for 6 months prior to review. This enables publishers to make changes to materials if desired and understand the rubric before submitting for review. As part of the publisher voluntary submission, we've added some additional benefits. Prior to quality reviews, publishers may provide an introductory orientation for reviewers that allows them to understand the product before they begin reviewing. In addition, publishers may submit a checklist of minimum expectations for reviewers, including which materials to look at. And then finally, publishers are able to provide a rubric alignment document similar to the TPG correlations, in which they have identified evidence within materials that demonstrate quality. After the quality reviews are done, publishers may appeal the process to submit comments, identify errors, or provide responses to the reviews. We have also included an opportunity for short-term revisions in a response to much digital products. So a short-term revision would allow a publisher to make minor revisions within the same review cycle and submit up to 3 indicators for re-review during that cycle before final reports are published. And then we have long-term revision submissions in which a publisher may decide to make larger changes to their product and resubmit in future cycles. We are anticipating applications for the review cycle to go live this winter if publishers are interested in submitting voluntarily. A quick timeline of where we are with the pre-K quality review. We are right now finishing up our rubric to set out for public comment. We will then have a final rubric released in this winter in 2019. We will then hold that rubric static for 6 months and then begin review of material for quality beginning in summer of 2020 with a release of reports in November to coincide with the state board adoption list. I encourage you to ask questions. Being a very new process, please submit them to the GoToWebinar, or you may email directly melissa.lautenschlager@teatexas.gov. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Melissa. As she mentioned, you can definitely submit those questions through the webinar or to her directly. I know we've given you a lot of information today, but thank you so much for continuing with us on this 2021 journey. Don't worry if you've missed anything. The webinar is being recorded, and we will be posting it along with all of our slides and the question and answer document to the publisher portal. Amy is up next.
Hello again. So this is me, Amy. And now that you know what it takes to participate in a proclamation, I'm going to walk you through the first set of deadlines and share some resources that I hope will help you along. The first major deadline is January 6th of 2020, and by this date, you need to have submitted your company information form and statement of intent to bid. The company information form provides the contact information for the individual managing your participation in the proclamation. This is the person that is primarily in charge of turning in deliverables and is our main point of contact. But we also need the contact information for the person in charge of bids and contracts, accessible materials, new sales, and customer service. You won't be able to enter a statement of intent to bid until you complete and submit the company information form. There are two ways to access publisher bidding. If you're a brand new publisher or one without materials active in EMAT, you most likely don't have EMAT access. In that case, you will use a public-facing link to get to the publisher bid start page. Once you're there, you'll select the proclamation year, which is 2021, and you'll click the magnifying glass to search for your company name, just in case you happen to already be there. You need to look through the list of names and select yours if you find it. Otherwise, you'll click Cancel to return to the previous screen. If you found your name, then you'll select Company Information Form. Otherwise, you'll just click I don't see my publisher name listed. If you do have EMAT access, you're just going to log in to your vendor start page to access publisher bidding and select Company Information Form. Whatever way you log in, you'll see the exact same company information form. As I mentioned earlier, we use this form to collect the contact information for people in various roles at your organization. So you'll provide the information and then click Save and then Submit. The system will prompt you to enter your name, and once you've done that, you just click OK. If any of the roles for which you're providing contact information tend to have a high rate of turnover, we really suggest using a project mailbox rather than a specific individual's email address. And that'll help you avoid missing any important communications if someone leaves your organization. Once you've completed the company information form, you'll be allowed to submit a statement of intent to bid. By submitting a statement of intent to bid, you're simply giving notice that you're thinking about participating in Proclamation 2021. We often call this throwing your name in the ring. It's important to note that submitting a statement of intent to bid doesn't commit you to anything, but if you miss the deadline, you're not allowed to participate. So if you're even remotely considering submitting materials to Proclamation 2021, you need to meet this deadline. But the good news is that this will be the easiest of all the deliverables. You'll access the statement of intent to bid the same way you access the company information form. So those without EMAT access will use the public-facing link to the publisher bid start page. And if you've just finished your company information form, your company name and the proclamation year will be pre-populated. If not, you'll just need to follow the steps I shared earlier to select the proclamation year and search for your name. Then you'll click Continue to SOITB, which stands for Statement of Intent to Bid. If you do have EMAT access, you'll just click Publisher Bidding, Statement of Intent to Bid / Complete Descriptions. Again, regardless of the way you got here, you'll all see the same bid status page. And to enter a bid, you'll just click Next. I promised earlier that this is the easiest deliverable you have, and now I'm going to prove it. First, you'll click the magnifying glass to select the subject area and MLC. And for this proclamation, there's only one option, Pre-K systems, and the MLC is 0001. Then you'll enter the name of your product and select the class type. You'll see 3 options, but since the board called for Pre-K systems, you will select teacher systems. Next, you'll enter your very best estimate for the percentage of TPG covered in your materials. We understand that you probably don't know at this point what percentage of the TPG your materials cover, so we will give you several opportunities to update that percentage. And you may have noticed that the field is actually titled Estimated TEACS Coverage, but for this proclamation, we're correlating to the TPG, not the TEACS. So you'll enter your TPG estimated coverage percentage right there. Then you're going to select the media format of your instructional materials. And if you plan to offer your materials in different formats, you'll select all that apply. Finally, if your materials include any digital components, you'll need to enter the system requirements, including any hardware, operating systems, processing speed, etc. needed to use the electronic components. Otherwise, you can just enter none. And then you're ready to submit. See, I told you it would be easy. After you throw your hat in the ring, you'll need to submit a complete description, and this is due February 3rd, 2020. The complete description identifies components that you plan to use to show alignment to the TPG, and it builds off of the statement of intent to bid. You'll need to be more specific on the complete description and provide a little more information. So for example, you'll get an opportunity to update your TPG percentage. You'll need to have an ISBN for your program as a whole and one for each of your components. In order for us to prepare for the Braille conversions that Janet mentioned, we'll need to know how many printed student pages are included in your submission. And it's okay if you're not 100% sure, but if you can get as close to the real number as possible, we would appreciate it. You'll provide a preliminary price for each component, but don't worry, you're not going to be bound to it. And we'll need to know who authored each component. We ask that you turn in preliminary correlations by February 24th of 2020. And preliminary correlations are basically a practice round. By turning these in, you'll have the opportunity to get feedback before the final correlations deadline. Your liaison will take a look at your submission and review them for completion, clarity, and accuracy. And all we need in order to do that is 1 to 2 pages of correlations that are a good representation of the type of correlations you plan to use. So you're not expected to have all of them completed by this deadline. The last deadline I'm going to talk about is April 6th, 2020, and there's several deliverables due on this date. You need to submit your affidavit of authorship or contribution, certification of editorial review, final correlations, your pre-adoption samples, and the report on interoperability and ease of use. The affidavit of authorship tells us how each person listed as an author or contributor actually contributed to the development of the material. And it also helps us to ensure that no TEA employee authored or contributed to the development of materials submitted for consideration, because that's against the rules. Publishers are required to conduct a thorough editorial review of the materials before submitting them for consideration, and the certification of editorial review confirms that you've done just that. Your final correlations will demonstrate where in your materials at least 50% of the outcomes in the TPG in each domain are covered. Honestly, these are really the most important thing you produce because they're used by the reviewers to determine your product's alignment to the standards. So I beg of you, please start your work on these as early as possible. Take your time and provide the clearest, most accurate correlations possible. I promise it'll pay off in the long run. The pre-adoption samples need to be sent to TEA and each of the 20 ESCs. They must be provided in the same media format that will be sold to districts and must remain unchanged until the final post-adoption sample is submitted. You will be required to document any change you wish to make to the materials and submit that list for review before the board votes on adoption. So that's just another reason why that thorough editorial review is so important before you submit your samples. Finally, the report on interoperability provides information about digital components regarding specific delivery formats, user authentication, rostering, and digital content standards compatibility. So this deliverable is only required if you have digital components. Whew, that was a lot of information. So now I'm going to show you where to go for help. I highly recommend that you read the proclamation and the Q&A right away if you haven't already done so. And if you didn't participate in the first webinar, you can go to our website to review that recording. And speaking of the website, you can go there to read more about the review and adoption process and to find publisher-specific resources on the publisher portal. And finally, if you haven't already subscribed to the review and adoption mailing list, you absolutely need to do that because it's how we communicate proclamation-related information. Anytime you have questions, you can certainly submit an instructional materials help desk ticket, or you can give us a call at 512-463-9601. And this will be your favorite source of help, and it is your publisher liaison. So after you submit a statement of intent to bid, you'll be assigned a publisher liaison. And that person will be your main point of contact for everything related to the review and adoption process. So you'll always have somebody to call or email when you have questions. And before we go to questions with Kelly, I am going to give you a quick tour of some of the resources that I mentioned. So I'm going to start on the instructional materials homepage, and you'll see right away where you can go to sign up for updates. And so you just click sign up for updates, put in your email address, and once you click submit, you'll be taken to a page that has all of the possible listservs that you can subscribe to, and you'll want to look for review and adoption. You can also find a link to, here on the right-hand side, the review and adoption process, which I mentioned. You'll find the adoption cycle, and then sort of step-by-step how instructional materials are adopted with links to different pages that go into more detail. And then finally, I want to show you the publisher portal, which you definitely need to bookmark. The publisher portal is going to contain all of the publisher-specific information. So all of the things that I mentioned earlier, like the proclamation, the Q&A, and that first webinar are right here on the publisher portal, and we update this anytime we have new information for you. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Kelly to answer questions.
Hi. I know all this stuff, and I'm still a little overwhelmed by the amount of information that we've thrown at you this afternoon in a really fast time period. So I suspect those of you who don't know the information are super overwhelmed. We've tried to answer questions in the question box to the extent possible during the webinar. There are a few that are a little bit technical that I didn't know the answer to, and I'm working on those. As I think Sarah mentioned at the very beginning, we will take all of these questions and answers and put them into a document that we will post on our website. One of the questions that was asked early on is if you can have access to the slides, and the answer is yes, in addition to providing you with a link to the recorded webinar, because we know you don't always want to listen to the entire thing. We will post the separate slideshows so that you can go more directly to the specific information that you hope will answer, you know, whatever specific question you have at the moment. We've still got a few questions coming in, but I'm not 100% sure that I can answer them, but give me just a second. Okay, so the last question that came in, well, actually the last two. There's one, is there a separate Spanish adopted list? There's not a separate adopted list, but we will include in the adopted list English products, Spanish products, and those that that provide both. So, you know, you as the publisher will decide, are you publishing two separate products, or are you publishing one product with English components and Spanish components? If so, that's the product that has the opportunity to be adopted and on the adopted list. If you're submitting two separate products, an English version and a Spanish version, then both of those products would have the opportunity to be on an adoption list. And then the last question, can you clarify what student-facing materials might look like in the context of pre-K, age development range? And that's one of the questions we are actively working on. We've got we've got an outside expert who is trying to help us with that. And of course, before we publish anything, that will go to Jackie and her team for their review and approval in a simple, casual way. I will tell you that I want to preface this by saying I am a high school English teacher, so I am by no means an expert on early childhood education, and I invite Jackie to jump in here at any moment. But we anticipate that student-facing materials will come in the form of number cards, letter cards, picture cards, those kinds of things. I'm actually just going to pause right now and see if Jackie wants to add anything to that.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about, so I just want to make sure that I'm on the right thing, that we're talking about the different things that come with the pre-K systems. Correct.
What kinds of student-facing materials would we expect to see in a pre-kindergarten system? Since they won't be things like little books for students to read.
They won't be books. They could be books for students to read. Certainly they may be, but more importantly, we'll be looking for great texts for adults to read. To children, texts that lend themselves to multiple domains on the pre-K guidelines, and that are something that a child would want to hear over and over. not only small books, but perhaps larger text so that teachers could do shared reading and children can see print. Other things would include, as you said before, manipulatives like teddy bear counters or whatever shaped counters. But beyond that, also materials to do science experiments. I think the best things that I've seen overall in our pre-K systems, that the materials that are called for by the teacher guide are actually in the system to be able to be used for the teacher. In that way, if the classroom does not have the items that are needed to teach, the system would be guaranteed to have the items that are taught. And I think that for most districts, that's what they're going to be looking for, not having to buy a system that would then have lessons in it that would require them to buy additional materials on top of the system.
Great, thank you. The other part of that question, I believe, was what are the dates of the November board meeting? And Amy, I'm wondering if with your handy multiple screens, you can provide that answer more easily than I can.
I, in fact, can. I can tell you that the November meeting is the week of November 12th, and I will show you where you can find that information as well as tune in to the actual meeting. So here we are at the main TEA page, and if you hover over About TEA and select State Board of Education, then you can see the upcoming meeting dates. You can also access the current agenda, and when the meeting date arrives, you can access the live broadcast. As each meeting concludes, you can access an archive. So you can see here, you can click past meetings. If there was a current meeting, then you would have the option to view the broadcasts here.
Great. So let's cover a few other questions that have come in the last few minutes. Samples to districts will be costly, especially if the requirement is full samples. Can school district samples be a smaller representation of the final product? We do recognize that providing physical samples is more costly to publishers than virtual samples, as we do in other proclamations. But right now, the rules do require for full samples. The rules are currently published in the Texas Register, and we can happily, actually, Amy, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe we just sent out an email, a listserv message that provides a link to the Texas Register. We would encourage all of you to go review those rules as they are currently proposed, and provide us with any public comment that you may have regarding the rules. That rule is something that you know, could conceivably be changed in response to public comment. The link that Amy showed you a few minutes ago about how to sign up for the review and adoption listserv will enable you to access, to have immediate access to any future listserv messages. But if you haven't already become a member of that listserv list and you want us to send you the message that went out last week or earlier this week, we're certainly able to do that. So just email us at the instructional materials email address that Amy provided you earlier. And then we always seriously welcome public comment on those rules. I'm going to pause for a moment to see if any of my colleagues have anything to add to that.
Yes, Kelly, this is Amy. I just wanted to mention that in that recent Gov Delivery Bulletin, we also included instructions for providing public comment. So if you got the email, then great, you have what you need. And if you didn't, definitely send us an email at review.adoption@tea.texas.gov.
Great. Okay, the next question is from Ernesto. Will all the cards have to be submitted to TEA and ESCs, or can we sticker one of 20 if there are multiple cards? I'm assuming you mean like student cards, like letter cards or picture cards. All of the cards would need to be a part of the sample that is provided both to TEA and to the ESCs. I'm going to pause just a moment to give myself time to read the next question. The next question is regarding the TRR, and so I'm going to ask Melissa if she will either address this question or, and this is perfectly fine, Melissa, say that she can't just yet, but we will include it in our question and answer document.
I think the question is just a little bit about stating that Proclamation 2021 was issued in 2019. We understand that. We have made some adjustments to our review process. I'm happy to have a conversation separately, I think, with Ellen. But the quality review is aligned to the Texas pre-kindergarten guidelines. So there aren't things that are different than what's in the guidelines.
Great, thank you. Claudia, you are next. Where would one find out more about how the breakout skills need to be covered in instructional materials? We as an agency really don't provide guidance on how the skills need to be covered. That is an independent publisher decision. And so we can't either legally or ethically tell you how to cover those skills. And so I think I'm just going to leave that at that.
Kelly?
Yes.
I just want to add, though, that we will.
And I'm sorry, this is Jackie?
Nope, this is Amy.
Okay.
We will release a technical training to show you how to demonstrate coverage and in, you know, what ways do you demonstrate coverage in terms of if you've participated in previous proclamations where we needed a narrative and an activity, which I didn't get into in this training, but once we get past the November board meeting and are able to produce the correlation documents that align to the requirements that are adopted in rule, we will have a technical training available to show you how to correlate your materials.
Great. The next question is regarding an English and a Spanish program. And I think this is a slightly technical question that I'm actually going to ask Amy to respond to.
Oh boy, which question is this? Who is the
submitting one program, Andrew, if submitting one program that contains both English and Spanish, does the publisher have to submit two different correlations? I think the answer is yes. One for each language, and is each language reviewed independently and given a score?
Okay, so you are correct, Kelly. The answer is yes to does the publisher submit two different correlation documents. So we will produce correlations in English and Spanish just as we produce breakouts in English and Spanish. And I suspect there are some minor differences between the two just because of language. And in terms of is each language reviewed independently and given a score, my initial response to that is we will review both sets of correlations, but the review would be conducted by the same group of people who are bilingual, and therefore you would likely get the same score.
Thank you. Next is Joe. How many printed samples are required for public review? The answer is 1 for TEA and 1 for each of the ESCs. Then when the time comes for the actual state review panel meeting, you will need to provide enough samples for that review panel, which usually consists of 5 people. We try to make them consist of 5 people to effectively review your product. Amy, you're welcome to add anything to that if you'd like.
Nope, that's exactly right. 21 plus the number needed for the reviewers.
Okay. I believe we've come to an end of the active question. Oops, of course we haven't. Okay, this is, well, I may change my mind because I do that all the time, but maybe this is the last question we'll address before we dismiss. In 2011, TEA established the price for pre-K systems. Will TEA do this again? No. In 2011, legislation was passed creating the instructional materials, the technology and instructional materials allotment, as it is currently named. That ended the era of maximum price for instructional materials. So we no longer have a maximum price, which means you can charge $10 or $4,000 for your kit. That is determined by you, the public, the market, the same way all prices for every product in the world are determined. So there will be no max price, max cost for pre-K materials. Okay, there are no more questions rolling in, and so I'm going to bring us to a close by thanking all of you very, very, very much for your attendance. We really appreciate your participation. Thanking all of my fellow presenters for their presentations and contributions to the conversation. And let's all go enjoy the rest of our afternoon.